Welcome back. As I mentioned, we have Dr. Mickey Karam here on behalf of the California Center for Pelvic Health and Sexual Wellness. Welcome. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Now, that is an awful lot to cover in your title, and you also are collaborating with Axonics, so you have a relationship with them with some technology that we'll talk about later. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm a OBGYN by training, and then I did extra training in what we now call female pelvic medicine and reconstructive surgery, or what's commonly called urogynecology. Okay. I basically deal with women who have very, very common problems that unfortunately are not talked about much. We call these pelvic floor disorders, and in a nutshell, you could categorize them into sort of 5 subgroups. It's bladder issues, which is the main topic for today, bowel problems, defecation disorders, problems with pelvic organ support. Ironically, many women, as they age and have vaginal deliveries, they lose support of their tissue and they develop something called prolapse. Female sexual dysfunction, which again is something that's not talked about a lot, which is very, very prevalent. And then finally, a variety of pelvic pain disorders. But the topic today is around a very, very common problem called urinary incontinence, or basically a woman that loses the ability to appropriately control her bladder.
Right.
And to put it in perspective, we spend probably close to $3 billion a year on adult protective wear for women. Ugh. One study has shown that by the year 2025, there's going to be more adult diapers sold than baby diapers. So it's a huge problem. Women are suffering in silence, and it's great to have an opportunity to hopefully let people know that they don't have to suffer in silence. There are a lot of solutions.
So then your center in particular covers all of the things that you just mentioned?
We cover all of those, those sort of 5 categories, and again, extremely prevalent problems that are quality of life problems. You're not going to live and die by these things, but they can certainly impact your quality of life.
Well, exactly, and especially if you were an active woman, for instance, you know, playing tennis, and we have lots of people who play tennis and play pickleball. The last thing you want to do is have to run off the court because of these types of issues. Absolutely,
and even things like toilet mapping. You'd be amazed how many women will not go somewhere unless they know where every toilet is. And you know, we're going to talk about a condition called an overactive bladder, which is this sort of, you know, out of the blue, sudden loss of large amounts of urine, which is devastating. And there's all these comorbidities. You socially isolate yourself, you become depressed, you gain weight, and et cetera, et cetera.
So we have a document that we'd like to show, and you refer to it as care pathway. What does that mean?
So a care pathway is basically a pathway that describes how you should manage a problem. And you start off with, as you can see here, the first and foremost important thing to do is don't be shy about talking to your doctor or your healthcare provider, because again, we've got to get out of the state of having people think that this is a normal part of aging. It's not, and we as physicians are very guilty of that. It's like, you know, the old school was, oh, come on, Mrs. Smith, you're 60 years old. What? You know, these things happen, and it shouldn't be that way. So the first thing is make somebody aware of it, and then you try and quantitate the severity of the state from a quality of life standpoint. And simple education, teaching a woman that they don't need to drown themselves with water. This idea that you need to drink 8 glasses of water every day, and again, if there's a reason, if you're on a diet or if you're taking certain things that require that, that's fine. But you don't need to drown yourself in water. And the bladder is really almost like a poorly disciplined child. The more you give into it, the more it takes advantage of you. So things like bladder training, teaching a patient how to appropriately use her pelvic floor muscles, the Kegel, because these are deep muscles, they're hard to isolate. So women think they're Kegling and they're really not a lot. So these are the basic things. And then this specific pathway is for what we call overactive bladder, which is where the bladder muscle that should be voluntary becomes involuntary. It starts to contract when you're at the mall or shopping, and all of a sudden you're in a race with your bladder. So there are medicines for that, and so you can start with some medicines. Unfortunately, the medicines have some side effects. They can be very, very expensive, but they work well in some patients, and that's kind of the next step of that.
Yeah.
And then after that, you get into the more specific things that Axonics works with.
Okay.
And that's a specific neuromodulation device that has just been life-changing for so many women, and we'll come back to that.
Well, and that it looks amazing, so we will come back to that. So let's talk about the SUI and Bulkamid treatment. What is that?
Yeah, so in general, if a woman who is otherwise neurologically intact, which 99% of the people watching they are, and they have a problem with bladder control, it's going to be one of three things. It's going to be either stress urinary incontinence, which has nothing to do with emotional stress. Stress urinary incontinence is when you leak urine and your abdominal pressure rises. So it's leakage with a cough, with a sneeze, exercising, jumping, running. The pressure that's created overcomes the outlet resistance of the urethral tube, which we're going to show in a second, and you leak urine. The other big player is what we were just talking about, an overactive bladder. Totally different problem. That's the bladder muscle that's contracting involuntarily and pushing urine out of the bladder.
Okay.
And then the third category is when the two coexist. So we're going to start off by talking about stress incontinence.
Now, in regards to what you just mentioned, stress incontinence. Now, you mentioned Axonics. Is that a product that you use for that?
Very commonly, I use a product. It's called Bulkamid, and it's a bulking agent. So this little urethral tube that's lost its resistance gets bulked up, just the way a woman would bulk up her lips with collagen. We bulk up the urethral tube to create resistance. It's a very simple procedure. It's done without any anesthesia. There's no downtime. The patient can literally drive herself there and drive herself home.
Okay.
And the success rates have been phenomenal. So this has been a fantastic advent to our armamentarium, because prior to that, all we had was pelvic floor physical therapy or a surgical intervention, which involves a mesh sling that's a permanent implant.
Right.
So you have millions of women that are sitting in idle that they haven't got the success they like with physical therapy, but they're really not ready to go for a surgery yet. So, so this has been a fantastic addition to our ability to treat stress incontinence.
Tell me how long it's been around.
So it's ironically been around since 2008 or 9. I was actually involved in the initial FDA trial at that time. It then was purchased by a company in Europe. They never pursued FDA clearance in the United States. It's been used in Europe now for 15 years.
Wow.
It's the #1 treatment in the UK and parts of Australia and New Zealand. It became FDA approved in the United States in 2020.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now, here's a question for you.
Sure.
How often does insurance cover something like this?
Insurance does cover it.
It does or does not?
It does cover it.
Oh, it does?
It does, 100%.
It's a miracle, because, sometimes you get all these great ideas.
So the good news is bulking agents have been around since the mid-90s. Unfortunately, these other agents didn't have the durability and were just kind of salvage therapy. And now we have a treatment that really is a primary treatment for this problem, and it is fully covered by insurance.
So tell me how it works.
So
I know you said it enlarges or bulks it up. What does that mean?
Basically, if this is the opening of the urethral tube to the bladder, you put a small scope in, and you create cushions right at the inner part of the urethral tube, and it just creates resistance. And the difference is that these cushions maintain their volume over time. And that's how this is differentiated from previous bulking agents.
Okay.
It has durability.
And do you have to have it done again at some point?
So sometimes you do. About 30% of patients will have what we call a top-up, or because we inject them, and if they say, I'm 80% better, we bring them back and inject a little bit more. And again, that's covered by insurance as well.
Fantastic.
But again, I did the initial trial 12, 15 years ago, and we've seen patients that have had durability for 5 and 10 years with this.
That is awesome. And where is your location? Where are you guys located?
We're in Corona Del Mar.
In Corona Del Mar, and that's the California
Center for Pelvic Health and Sexual Wellness.
That is wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the information. I think you guys are going to get a lot of calls.
Well, let's hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. If you want more information about the center as well as Axonics treatments, you can certainly go to the website that is on your screen. We'll be right back.